This could be the beginning of the end for the human race. For what men first thought were meteors or the often ridiculed flying saucers are in reality the flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars.
Looks like they're going to come out of that gully pretty soon. We'll have to rush our defenses to be ready when they do.
The guard can need plenty of reinforcements.
We'll get them. Lieutenant! Look!
They slash across country like scythes, wiping out everything that's trying to get away from them.
That explains why communication is cut the moment their machines begin moving.
Montreal's blacked out. Nothing more's come through.
Same thing that happened on the Pacific coast. Anything from them yet?
No, Mr. Secretary, we've had nothing from San Francisco for over 5 hours.
The nations of the world mobilize their armed might, rushing to defend the Earth against the unknown weapons of the super race from the Red Planet. Is there nothing that can stop the Martian death machines?
Guns, tanks, bombs, they're like toys against them.
We know now that we can't beat their machine. We've got to beat them.
All over the world, human beings cower before the onslaught of these unearthly enemies, whom no one has ever seen. Panic that sweeps around the globe as the great masses of mankind flee blindly in a headlong stampede of hysteria.
Everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and joining me today I have Mike and Mike. Say hello, Mike and Mike.
Hi, Mike and Mike.
Hello.
Today we are going to be hitting one of our classic sci-fi films that we typically do when Mike is around. And the one we're going to hit today is probably, I would say, one of the top, not only top 10, but maybe top 3 of the definition of classic sci-fi. And what we're talking about is War of the Worlds. Starting Tom Cruise and... Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh,
this
please, that's not a top 5. Maybe a top 5 of the bad remakes.
Of the 2000s.
Not the TV
even.
show? Or?
No, we're talking about the original 1953 War of the Worlds. Now, I hadn't seen this in a while, and one of the things that kind of shifted things for me was the fact that the way the whole movie starts with that. And one of the things Mike noticed off the bat is the black and white logo in the beginning, which kind of makes you think a little bit that you're about to see a black and white film. But no, this is full color. And it starts off with a newsreel type of thing when they're showing you all these different kind of montage of the planets and, you know, what's out there and this and that. And I had completely forgotten that entire thing. For some reason, I keep thinking of War of the Worlds as you just jump into the story. And I guess maybe that's because we watched The Blob recently, and then The Blob, you just jump right into the story. But again, this one is the one that was remade with Tom Cruise and, you know, a couple years ago by Steven Spielberg. And this is also the same War of the Worlds that was at one point turned into a very famous radio broadcast with Orson Welles that caused some kind of panic when it was first aired because some people didn't realize it, and the way that they were presenting it. In a way, it was kind of weird for the time, if you will, because kind of like now, I know there's a different format of certain films that it's like the POV found footage format where you're viewing these movies and they're usually like the point of view of a camera, and it's like you found this footage and you're being told. I'm talking stuff like Blair Witch, even Cloverfield a couple years ago, but back in the 30s, they kind of did something like this with radio in terms of they really didn't remind people while this thing was playing that this was fake. And because it was radio, a couple of people, maybe a lot of people, I'm not sure exactly how many, they were actually, you know, either jumping into the middle of the story and they were thinking that this was happening for real. So that kind of caused a bit of a controversy and, you know, stirred things up a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why it became so infamous at the time. Now, the story wasn't an Orson Welles story. This comes from H.G. Wells. So this thing's been around for quite a long time. And as Mike pointed out to me while we were watching the movie, the way that even the Martians are depicted is kind of different in terms of how their machines walk around, as opposed to in the movie where these things are kind of floating by and they're wreaking havoc all over the place.
On magnetic legs.
Right. They kind of changed it a little bit. But Mike, why don't you tell us just briefly, in terms of like the story, because it follows the same story that I remember from listening to the radio broadcast. How is this film similar, let's say, in terms of the way that the story is being unfolded to everybody? It's a narrative in the beginning, just like before. Somebody's telling us the story of what happened.
Well, I think, like you said in the beginning, it starts out with the narration explaining the solar system and why Earth was picked. And there is narrative pops up in the movie in the beginning, the middle, the end. They throw it in a little bit to help kind of explain things. But how it moves, it just starts with narration, but then jumps into the action with a meteor crashing. The scientists happen to be out in the mountains doing site tests, field tests or something. Actually, they were fishing at that point. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Forrester goes in. He's the leader in, was it nuclear propulsion? He's like the top scientist. He made it on the cover of Time magazine.
And he's brought into the story because the story starts off with the people that are actually seeing these things crash landing, these meteor type of things. And as one of them crashes, they're like, hey, isn't Dr. So-and-so nearby camping? Let's go get him. So that's how he's brought into the story.
Correct. And then once he goes in, he meets the townspeople, the mayor, the local clergyman, and he finds Anne Robinson, and I just forgot her character's name. Sylvia. And he meets her, and that becomes the love interest for the movie.
Now, you said you met her?
Yes, we met her several years ago at a convention. It was one of a film convention in Nostalgia.
There's a horror convention thing or whatever it was, sci-fi horror convention.
Yeah, sci-fi horror. I don't remember which one it was. I actually remember the story was we told her, oh, the only reason we're here is because we heard you were coming down and we wanted to get a chance to meet her and get her autograph. And she was really nice and sweet, and she loved talking to the fans.
And we're going to mention her a little later because when we talk about the cafe we visited, she was apparently one of the donors of a lot of the memorabilia in the cafe that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But what's her role? She's basically the female lead, the very typical 50s kind of character.
Make the coffee,
Yeah, I mean, we've seen characters like this a little bit when we did
The Thing from Another
World. Even The Blob, you see that you have your female characters, but this was more of a stereotypical
the stereotypical 1950s
housewife, make
woman.
coffee.
I'm here to make coffee and to scream.
The secretary, there was a secretary involved.
And to scream, right.
The screaming is very important.
Several times in the movie.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting in this movie, and I don't know if I want to say it's disappointing, is the fact that the entire movie is basically discovering what the problem is. What are these creatures? And as the movie progresses, you learn little by little. You learn the fact that, okay, they're very powerful in their vehicles, let's say. They're blowing things away left and right. And then little by little, you start to learn there's somebody actually inside. There's another creature. So you kind of start learning that they're a little weak internally. And the scientists are kind of racing against the clock, continually racing against the clock, trying to figure out a new way of trying to find some kind of defense for it because they're always playing catch up. In other words, the army's throwing everything they have at them and they keep failing. They just keep failing. Off the bat, they have that force field, which was a great effect. Do you remember what I'm talking about? The
little
glass,
bubble.
the little glass
They
bubble.
protect
Or
a
whatever it was.
protective blister, as Dr. Forrester called it.
Well, speaking of the actual effect, obviously this is science fiction, and this is one of the best things about this movie is the special effects for their time. They must have been like, for us, what Star Wars was in terms of how modern and amazing the special effects were. And I think they pretty much still kind of hold out a little bit. I mean, granted, you were pointing out, oh, look, there's the wire there, there's the wire here. You know, what do you remember about the way that they did the special effects?
I thought they were cool. I always remember as a kid, just the sounds and the green glow that would just melt everything. And what was it? Takes the magnetic bonds or something of it matter, tears it apart. But just between that and the fire ray.
I like when they disintegrate that general or something and you see them, he glows skeleton. And then the skeleton inside. It's like, it reminded me a little of Return of the Jedi when Vader is getting zapped and you see the glow inside, the internal glow. That was kind of cool.
Well, even with the remake, I remember with the Tom Cruise ones when they shot him, and before they turned the dust, they showed they kind of but before they kind of showed the skeleton
outline of the skeleton. Yeah,
I remember maybe it was a homage to it or.
Do we have to talk about that one?
It has to come up sooner or later.
It was remade.
Can we talk about it later?
Well, you know what it is? They really didn't do a movie this important, you figure they might have made like a couple of remakes already, but no, they've only remade it once.
Well,
and a TV show.
The TV show
The
in the
TV show
80s,
also, that's right. I forgot about that one.
which is basically a sequel, because I remember they were saying, that the War of the Worlds took place 30 years before.
Well, they talk about the broadcast, the fact that it was like, for real or something like that. Yeah,
it's almost the return of the War of the World, the creatures.
And I remember, the creatures were coming back, and they would go into warehouses where they find some of the machines that were stored away, and they were trying to stop the aliens from activating them. So that was pretty cool.
So technically, that was almost like a sequel TV show.
Until the second season, then it became like the future, and it became really weird. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I always remember the sequel was
syndicated.
The second season just became weird. It became futuristic, and it's like society's falling apart, but they're still fighting the aliens. Yet the first one was, the aliens were there. And it's like some people forgot about them.
That's right. There was like mass hypnosis or something. Everybody forgot that it happened, and they're denying it or something.
Yeah, it was something a little different. But,
they try to do something different. But anyway, getting back to the film, we're talking about the special effects. I like the fact that they kind of minimize as much as possible, and they had to use it at certain points. You can tell they're using some kind of blue screen technology that they are able to kind of cut out around the area, and it doesn't look that great. But the majority of the shots they did use, because they use wires or some kind of, not only wires, but maybe something else holding it, they were able to put these huge, pretty big, from what I remember the pictures I've seen of the models, pretty big models in miniature city or forest type of settings. And they look really good because of the fact that you're not doing any really optical effect. You are just putting big models and big miniatures.
Yeah, and they use miniatures, matte paintings.
There was one cool shot I remember when they're flying the plane and they're about to crash, and they pass through a field where the ships are blowing stuff up that look really, really cool. And I mean, we can tell it's miniatures, but it's like, wow, that's pretty good for, again, 1953. This is like really basic special effects. But now the other thing was that we kind of lucked out because we were watching it and it was apparently a high definition copy. And I didn't remember how good the colors are. It's such a nice, colorful kind of film. Maybe it's because we've been watching it so many years, kind of washed out on, Channel 9 or Channel 11 or something. But it is such a difference when you watch something when it's been remastered and cleaned up and that sort of thing. It looked really, really good.
There's a nice clear copy, nice clean, and for 53 especially. And, I know they spent, for its time, they spent a lot of money. I think I saw was $2 million, and that's $2,053,000.
Well, George Pal was the producer, I believe, right?
Yes.
And he was a kind of, down the line, he was a pretty big, important type of Hollywood producer. So I guess this was one of the highlights of his career, I imagine.
Another cool story, you were just talking about the models. I remember many years ago, when I got a chance to go to Forrest J. Ackerman, his house into the Acker Mansion. He has one of the original props that were used in War of the Worlds.
One of the ships?
One of the ships.
Wow.
He had that, and just to throw some other things, but he had one of the gas grenades used in the original King Kong movie. He had some of the Brontosaurus, I think, the armature that was used. He had that out on display. Earth versus the Flying Saucers. He had, I forgot, the White House but it's one of the monuments in the saucer, but he had some of the original. Monument. Yeah, I think it was the Washington Monument. I'd have to get the pictures.
Well, would this be considered one of the original disaster films? Because, before they kind of became their own subgenre of space things blowing up, monuments or obviously even in the 40s and the 50s, I imagine there's probably tons of films where space UFO type of ships or something are destroying things that we kind of recognize.
The stereo 1950s
Earth versus the flying saucers and stuff like that.
Invasion of the Martians, whatever it was. But for the effects at this time, I think it was pretty good. And even though you said you saw the wires and everything else, but for its time, you see it on the big screen, I'm sure it was amazing.
Right.
For its time.
I wonder if we're being way more picky nowadays because of the fact that we're watching it in HD, and you are now capable of seeing so many more details that maybe in a regular standard broadcast you kind of overlook the sharpness of the wire and you don't notice it as much. I wonder if that's something that's happening now.
I think so, because like we were saying before, everything's so grainy and it's not as clear. And so when you see a high def version, you're like, oh, yeah, you can see the errors pop up a little easier. But again, isn't that the problem with high def today?
Well, yeah. You start to see stuff you never noticed before. Now, story-wise, one of the things that to me it's a little weird, it's also very untraditional, I guess, is the fact that, as I was mentioning before, they're always playing catch-up on this, and it gets to the point where the army just doesn't know what to do anymore. They're just basically in retreat mode all over the world. And the scientists are, well, we're gonna go into the lab and figure out something with we have this thing that the guy chopped off like some viewing device or something, which if you think about it, I don't understand what the point of that in terms of story-wise, the fact that they were able to capture that device so they can then project light through it and see how they would see us. So
how's that going to really...
How is that relevant to anything? How does that help the story in any shape or form? That the Martians see us as this big green things that we scare them? Is that the point?
No, I think the other thing was to show that everything was in threes. Because remember later on they talk about there was 3 pupils. The aliens had 3. Their mechanical device, the viewer, has 3 pupils the same.
And the way that they move their armies and stuff.
With 3.
They land in 3.
They land in 3.
But how does that
help? That just kind of shows
their technology. But let me ask you a question. How does that help in the resolution of the story? Because the story ends in a way that I hate it when they do this. And again, I love the movie, but I hate the fact that it's kind of like we just don't know what to do anymore. And it's like, okay, they just died, they got sick. It's like, oh.
But that was also the story in the book and everything else.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's where that came from. But it wouldn't be unusual for a movie to deviate at some point and say, you know what, let's make a little more cohesive ending, or a little more ending that more traditional, that it makes a little more sense, that it's just them.
Well, I think it was more of, it shows that you don't always win with technology.
No, but it's also
and where it's biology came in, where just God created the creatures that's in your blood that doesn't affect us, but it affects the Martians.
So do you think the message of this film is more of a religious message in terms of, you know what, don't bother fighting, let God take care of it? Do you think that's what they're trying to tell you?
But it's also like the time that it was made, it's always those sci-fi movies of the 50s and early 60s. They always had the army do the first wave, then the scientists had to figure something out to save the world. And then this took a step further by taking it brute force to scientists to religion. Almost. It was very strong religion.
Well, the priest that dies in the beginning who's trying to make friends, them hiding in the church, those are very religious iconic type of images.
And not to mention the Power 3, which is like the trilogy, which is also, they could do it that way too. So I think it's all relevant, like the army, the scientists, religion, and it was like, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and the whole bit. And the show religion is still very important. If you have religion, you could save the world.
I guess that's the message they're trying to give us.
I think that was one of the things they're trying to, at least in the movie version. I'm not sure what the book version is because I haven't read the book.
Right, but I mean, from the radio, I remember it was pretty similar in terms of they don't know what to do, and then again, the story's it's narrated, so it's happening after the fact.
Even in the radio, like Orson Welles' character was a scientist, and he's the one trying to figure it out. Are we going to stop the Martian invasion? And for the most part, we were defeated until the very end, of course. And
then out of the blue, they just started reacting to the microbes, I guess, that we are immune to. And that's kind of how it ends. But again, to me, that's the only real weakness in the story, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that it's a plot device. I forget what they call it in literature, but it's this thing where... was it the God and the Machine or something where out of the sky there's a hand that comes and resolves your story without any explanation or logic. It just resolves it.
Wasn't that in The Stand at the end with the nuclear bombs in Nevada?
The Mist. Remember the Mist? At the end, it was like, Earth was pretty much defeated until the very end, and the army defeated them. They didn't really exactly say how, but they all kind of like died out because they couldn't survive eventually.
Well, no, I think in the Mist
the mist disappeared.
Well, the army eventually comes through and chases them around, I guess, and kind of herds them back into wherever dimension they are coming from.
Yeah, well, I was bringing up The Stand because wasn't The Stand...
The Stand was the nuclear bomb.
The whole nuclear bombs, but you had that hand of God that came in and wiped out Nevada.
Right, and that's Stephen King, and Stephen King has been known to do that sometimes, that at the end, he kind of throws logic out the window and just cleans up the mess. And this is kind of what happens in this movie. It's like, well, we're not giving you, like you said, there's no army solution, there's no scientific solution, let's just let it resolve itself through
faith and religion
or whatever you want to call it, and that's how they kind of wrap it up. again, I am surprised in a way that they hadn't remade this movie earlier than they did. Obviously, the one we talked about earlier was Spielberg, Tom Cruise, which I really enjoyed it. It kind of follows most of the beats of this movie. I know Mike wasn't too happy. What was it that made you unhappy about the movie?
Parts of it, to me, just, it dragged. It could have moved quicker. The problems I had, the pacing I thought was very slow. When they're in the basement and they go through that whole Tom Cruise is fighting with, what's his name?
Tim Robbins.
Tim Robbins,
yeah.
I thought that was drawn out way too much. I know Spielberg wanted to show the plight of the people being driven out, very similar
the refugees,
to the refugees, and it's war, and you're getting forced out of the cities, and you're trying to
It's a normal man's point of view.
Well, you got to remember, Spielberg
view.
around that time was coming off of Saving Private Ryan, so he had that whole World War II thing in his head, and that whole people running type of deal.
That dragged on maybe a little too much. And then the other problem was it's War of the Worlds. He didn't show, to me, enough fighting the aliens.
And the war part. Huh?
The war part. Well, like I said, the whole point, like in this movie, I mentioned it while we were watching it, is 10 minutes when they first come out of the gully and the priest, he first gets killed, and you have just the aliens are unloading and the army's unloading. It's back and forth. You didn't really get that in the remake. You had it very little, but it was like the Jeep coming over the hill, a tire coming over the hill. Wait, no, I want to see the stuff actually explode.
You saw the lights in the background.
You saw the lights in the back.
The sun that goes off, I'm going to fight this battle. I'm going to see the aliens. He disappeared, and then, like I said to Mike before, it's a miracle that he's one of the few survivors that had no training, no nothing, but he ran off the fight, and he came back, and of course Tom Cruise's son has to live because he's Tom Cruise's son.
I think one of the most memorable scenes in the remake, there's two. The first is the actual appearance of the ships, and they're coming out of the earth and destroying that area where he lived, and then the
Trenton
boat
or whatever.
The ferry scene was really cool.
I liked the ferry scene; it was cool, but I still had problems with lightning keeps striking the same spot, and that's where the alien vessels come out, the machines come out.
It's like activated the pods in the earth or whatever.
But
they were activated, that they were underground
for thousands of years, and they just became active.
Or did they get teleported there?
Right, no, in this movie, obviously,
really
no. They're
weird.
landing and they're there, and that's it.
To me, that made no sense. I didn't like. That's another thing I really didn't like about that movie. And of course, the Hollywood ending. Let's just walk down the middle of the street and there's nobody around, and yet, like you said, the door opens up and there's the grandparents, and yes,
Anne Robinson
was there.
And Gene Barry was the
with
main star in this movie too.
And then the son comes out and the mother's there, and it's like, oh, really?
See, but that bothers you on a modern movie. But if you had that kind of ending in one of these classic 50s or 60s movies, it wouldn't bother you at all because of the fact that with these older movies, you kind of you give them a little more rope, you give them a little more leash, if you will. But again, at the end, everybody's holding hands, and you see the crowds around the world. They're all kind of friends, and they're all looking up in the sky, and it's like, okay, I get it. Everybody's happy now. Now who's going to clean this mess? Because they show you, the
world,
iconic
the cities
world,
destroyed, the
Eiffel Tower and the Taj Mahal.
And one of the other neat parts, actually, of the remake was showing how that the Martians were trying to change the Earth more into their atmosphere. It's like terraforming.
Oh, and capturing humans.
And, well, they captured the humans because they needed the blood. But it was just more of the point. You can see how they're trying to change the Earth. Yeah, they're going to conquer it, but they still need to change it so they can live there. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of neat.
But, again, we usually, when we get together like this, we talk about these classics. And this one still holds out as far as I'm concerned. It works. It looks really good. If you have the opportunity to watch it in an HD format. Now, one last thing we want to kind of give you the heads up on. Last summer, I think it was, we took a road trip. And it's funny because while we were driving, I had downloaded the War of the Worlds broadcast, the radio broadcast, the actual Orson Welles broadcast. And it took us about that amount of time to get to the location we were going. And where was that? Princeton?
Yeah, it was in Princeton, New Jersey. And actually, side note, I think when you guys were listening to the radio broadcast, but we were listening to the original score.
Oh,
I have the original score. And actually, I think I do have the remake score also, but we were listening to the original score.
Well, the radio broadcast was really, again, this is the first time I listened to it from beginning to end. It was really good, and it works. It actually works. And what we did is we drove from North Jersey to South Jersey, basically, because we heard that they were there were actual, the radio locations where these things were supposed to have taken place. They actually had certain areas where they would have like maybe a monument or one specific coffee shop, like a cafe, where they would have a lot of like memorabilia and stuff like that. And what was that called? Do you remember?
The Grover Mill Coffee House.
There you go.
In
That's
Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Because that's again.
That's where they supposed to land it
That's
first.
the one. That's the first landing site. And tell us about the place.
It's pretty neat. It's a little local coffee house.
It's like a mom and pop
type place. It's in a strip mall, which you don't realize that it's there. But inside is all War of the Worlds movie poster memorabilia. There's some signed autographs. There's comic books.
Some models.
And I mentioned earlier that some of the stuff that was there was donated by the actress you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, we actually heard about it when we met Ann Robinson at the convention. She was selling a book that she autographed.
Right, dude. Like making of. War of the Worlds.
And she had mentioned that there was coffee house, Grover Mills, to go down there that she helped get it started, donating things. There's actually, I think there was also newspaper prints from the stories.
The original newspapers when people was actually believing the radio broadcast in 1938, and you said you heard it, and it's like, they do mention that there's a radio show, but very few times and very low if you listen to it. So they technically was in there, but the way it was, people did react to it. People called the police. People were calling the army.
Well, and the other thing too is you could, which we didn't see it, but you can drive by and see the water tower.
Yes.
Where people thought that was one of the alien ships. They said from a distance.
And in the park,
and we saw the monument.
We went to in the Van Park. It's only like 5-10 minutes away. There's a monument for War of the Worlds. I know that's still on my Facebook page. That was pretty cool. So if you do go out to Princeton, New Jersey, you can track down the coffee house. What do we have? Apple pie, we had dessert, Grover Mill, and then go to the thing. It's a nice half a day. We had fun.
We had a great time. It was a nice, beautiful day. So up next, you're going to hear an interview we did at the coffee house there with one of its employees who was telling us about the history of the place and, how it kind of all came together. So enjoy that interview. Hi, can you tell us your name and a little bit about your shop?
Okay, Frank Gambatese is the owner. That's my son-in-law. And my daughter, Mickey Gambatese. My name is Frank DeFranco. I just run the shop. And ever since my son-in-law was 17, he dreamt about having a cafe. And he collected all the War of the World comic books. And 8 years ago, it became a reality. So Ambeck sent them to Florida for a month to teach them how to roast. And they're the two top roasters in the country, I believe. And we have great customers. We have nice outmen. We have workers that are very friendly. Otherwise, they would be out of here. And like I say, really, it's very difficult to explain the feeling you get when you start from scratch, roasting your own coffee, buy the best beans, and be formal with everybody. Like I said, you come from New York.
Yeah.
We have people that we mail our coffee to in California. Well, not really. They come here, they're visiting their family. They taste our coffee, which is great. I mean, you can attest to that.
Yeah, we just had some. It was great.
And so that's. I mean, again, you see the ambiance here. We have. I don't think there's a coffee shop in West Windsor, in this area, that's geared like we are. And again, we're professionals. We have the greatest customers that I believe, and they're repeat customers. And word of mouth gets around. In fact, one of the big stations mentioned us that we're one of the 14 top cafes or businesses in the area. And that is compliment. You know how many thousands and thousands?
I'm sure there's got to be a ton of them.
And that's about all I can say. I mean, you can see yourself what the atmosphere is like.
How long did it take to collect all the memorabilia that you have up here?
Well,
do you know how long it took?
Comic books, it took them years, but a lot of these items were donated. And Ann Robinson, who played in the picture, War of the Worlds, donated the great picture there. So, the War of the World there. I mean,
as a matter of fact, a friend who's with me here today, he actually met her at a convention, and that's how he found out about this place, because she mentioned it, and that's how he was like, she apparently has something to do with a coffee shop somewhere in Jersey where they have a lot of
and she comes here occasionally,
Yeah, Mike, he's telling me the same thing that you were telling me, that she did actually donate a lot of the items that are
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how we found out about this place.
In fact, when we had the 75th anniversary in 19, thank you, dear. She came in, and it was a big thing. It was last year. So for 75 years, we had a great thing outside. We had people. I mean, the lot was full. I mean, even newspaper reporters. Everyone came.
And how good was it when all of a sudden they decided to remake the movie, so more publicity came about from the Tom Cruise version of the movie, that you have all the additional memorabilia for?
Well, when they had this movie, we were nowhere in sight. So we're only in the business for about 10 years.
Okay.
So that was before our time.
Mm-hmm.
But again, grabbing a hold of the idea, and he, like I said, he loved War of the World since he was 17, and he said, I'm going to have a cafe someday. So go to start. If you want to dream something and you want to do it, got it.
There it is.
Simple as that.
Well, I'll tell you something funny. Obviously, we've seen these movies dozens of times, but I had never listened to, or my family never listened to the actual radio broadcast. So on our drive up here, which was about an hour and a half, we played it. So we were getting ready by listening to the broadcast on our way to your store.
And you know how many people believed in this? And I was 8 years old, but I was looking for aliens. I never saw them. The truth, I was 8 years old. And my family, my parents were all shook up. And 8 years old, what do you know?
But it makes sense. If you don't listen to the beginning of it, if you just jump in and turn on your radio, and it's like, what the hell's going on here? This could be real. And it's like, you gotta listen to the whole thing.
Being there's no television,
right? You can't check. You can't confirm anything.
Exactly. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you very much for having us. Nice to meet you.
Same here. A pleasure. Come back again.
Thank you. All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's episode, which is all about War of the Worlds, another one of our classic films that we've hit up, in our hit list of classics. And I want to thank both Michael and Michael for joining me today. And until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon here at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
The Martians had no resistance to the bacteria in our atmosphere to which we have long since become immune. Once they had breathed our air, germs which no longer affect us began to kill them. The end came swiftly. All over the world, their machines began to stop and fall. After all that men could do had failed, the Martians were destroyed and humanity was saved by the littlest things which God in his wisdom had put upon this earth.
Stop.